Hello, Ivy here. This week's podcast is entitled The Tale of Two Dukes of Sussex. Introduction. This podcast will explore the dichotomy of the treatment of both Dukes of Sussex by their respective fathers, who were also kings, in comparison to the treatment of other prominent royals seen as exemplary. In all comparisons, the outcomes for both dukes have been better than ever imagined, and in the case of the second Duke of Sussex, Prince Harry is by far the most successful in terms of wealth and popularity, and most of all, independence. The punitive actions taken against both dukes never achieved what both kings expected. In today's age of social media, with the vehicle of the internet, each punitive action is publicised around the globe in seconds, and is seen by most for what each action is meant to cause. It hasn't worked. The reverberations from the games played already continues to wreak havoc on the ones dishing out the punishments, weakening the very institution it originally intended to strengthen and prolong its existence. This podcast will look at the reactions of key decisions in history, taken by both Dukes of Sussex, and the subsequent punitive actions taken by both monarchs, i.e. both fathers, towards their respective ostracised sons, and in particular the vindictiveness of actions taken by both monarchs against the Sussex children, whilst all the other grandchildren in both royal families were left alone. I will show the volume of direct matches in the range of punitive actions, and will include images and tables to show the matches. We will play an interactive game of Snap. You will also see various significant dates on the calendar and decisions in respect of Meghan and Harry, and will eventually notice that none of the key dates were accidental. Definite meaning and inference intended behind each and every one, clearly aiming for history to highlight the shade behind each key date. Anyone working in the royalty sphere, and any person dealing with statistics and trends and patterns aligned with historical knowledge, would see the game being played. None of it good. If by any chance all these key dates, etc., are mere coincidence, then I would say Prince Harry's words relating to meeting Meghan, which were, "the stars were aligned," would apply here. There are so many similarities in actions and terminology that it is very accurate to say that history was almost repeated. The same attitudes and standard royal playbook of vindictive actions was rolled out hundreds of years down the line, and advisers and the monarch really thought that they were going to get away with it. Nothing was learned since the Diana era, ending in 1997. Though in many ways it is like Princess Diana is looking on from a virtual place somewhere, and smiling, and probably saying, "Not this time. We are not playing around today." The latest nonsense with the date of the coronation can rightfully be considered the comedy section of the podcast. The silver lining in all of this is that the world is watching. And if anything adverse happens to any of the Sussex family, it will not suddenly elevate the UK Monarchy and its Royal Rota to high levels of popularity. Quite the opposite. Every action or slur made against the Sussexes is seen worldwide for what it really is. How any advisor within the royal establishment ever thought it would look good on the British royal family just shows how past their use-by date the firm really is. The Sussex children, along with interested people around the globe, will also be able to inform their children, and subsequent generations will know what was done to their ancestor and his family, and what was done and continues to be done to Harry and Meghan and their children, until any international legal action is hopefully taken in the future. All of the royal authors and Rota personnel and their fairy tales should start to think about their futures. There is no justification for taxpayers or newspapers to employ so many people to write about 7 or less senior royals, when the country which they are supposed to represent is a mere smokescreen for performative actions which benefit no one, i.e. the public, the charity, or even the individual performing for press and photographers, in rags that will sell less in the future anyway, as the business model of hunter and prey and hate incitement rhetoric is falling out of favour. It will be helped into extinction when advertisers are penalised for their unethical stance of marketing products and services on platforms and channels that incite hate activity, and where people have died or had mental health issues to contend with, as a direct result of interaction with those creating news for sale. Let's have a look at both the Duke of Sussexes. The majority of this narrative about the Dukes of Sussex centres more on the first Duke, not least to prepare the ground for the comparisons and similarities with the present day, of which we already know so much. So please bear with me as I spend time on the summary of the first Duke. Along the way, you will each most likely identify things that link to Prince Harry's situation in some way or another. There is truly a wealth of information out there about most members of the British royal family going back centuries. This podcast barely touches the surface of the information about the 12 siblings of the first Duke of Sussex, let alone the information about his parents, whose mother was considered to be mixed race by a few brave historians. But on the whole, most historians did not comment about it. You have noticed, if any of you have watched the Netflix series Bridgerton, that Queen Charlotte was in fact a person of colour, without actually referring to that fact. Historical data re the dukedom, the title and ownership. The Duke of Sussex title has only ever been used twice in the peerage of the United Kingdom. The current Duke of Sussex is Prince Harry, and the previous holder of the title was Prince Augustus Frederick, the 6th son of King George III. Prince Augustus was given the title of the Duke of Sussex on the 24th of November 1801, along with the following titles: Baron Arklow and Earl of Inverness. Baron Arklow was a title in the peerage of the UK that has also been created twice. Arklow is a town in County Wicklow in Ireland. The Baron Arklow was created again on the 24th of May 1881. The last person to hold this title was Prince Charles Edward, Duke of Saxe-Coburg and Gotha. Earl of Inverness was first created in 1718, and the last creation date, the fourth time, was in 1986, when the current, or rather the previous, Queen Elizabeth granted the title to Prince Andrew. For the purpose of this podcast, I won't go into the details which governed when titles could only be passed on to male heirs in the family concerned, but there is a wealth of information of the females who were older but passed over in favour of their brothers. The second thing I'd like to mention is note how the Queen gave this title to Prince Andrew, her so-called favourite, and despite everything that is going on in current times, still holds this title along with others. He is not a working royal, and he was involved in a globally known investigation, the case settled out of court in 1922, as the Queen gave Prince Andrew funds to pay off Virginia Giffey, who took legal action against Prince Andrew after many years of the Prince trying various ways to avoid having to respond to legal requests for information by the FBI. Note how Prince Harry has never been accused of any illegal activity, but was stripped of everything. The one thing they cannot take away from him without parliamentary discussion and approval is the Duke of Sussex title. One of the main current requirements for the removal of a title such as the Duke of Sussex is any illegal activity. We all know that Prince Harry is not accused of any illegality, but yet we still hear the paid trolls trying to make fetch happen, demanding that Harry should lose his title. What they all fail to understand is that any removal of a title from Prince Harry would automatically have Prince Andrew's, and possibly others, but a definite for Prince Andrew to have the titles removed, along with security, and a host of benefits he is currently receiving because of his mother. So, Parliament will only ever debate this issue if forced or encouraged to do so. Depends on which versions put forward to justify such actions, without it having an automatic impact on other members of the British royal family. It's useful to add here that, as it has recently come out, so to speak, that in 2020, after Prince Harry made his announcement on January the 8th, 2020, that he and Meghan were going to step back from senior royal duties. If you recall, there was a Sandringham summit that was held with a number of people discussing how things could move forward. Meghan had returned to Canada at this stage, so she was not present for this particular meeting. But it has since transpired that at that meeting, which apparently was quite heated, at that meeting, Prince Harry had put in writing and brought it with him to that meeting and handed it over, whether it be to Charles or the Queen at the time, regardless, it was written and handed in, given at that meeting. So everyone at the meeting was aware of that. They were witnessed it clearly because they're all at the same table. And in this letter, amongst many other things, Prince Harry said, take the titles. If you want them, take them. Now, we all know that since 2020, there has been regular calls, regular polls done by the Royal Rota crew asking, should the Sussexes lose their titles, or articles that say, take the titles, they don't deserve them, etc., etc., etc. All nonsense, all just whipping up negativity against the couple. When it transpires, they were offered, as part of their discussions, take them. And the royal family chose not to. They preferred the drama, the anger, the hatred that was incited against this couple since 2020 and never said a word. And obviously the Royal Rota knew that too, but as is the playbook with the royal family and their propaganda team in the Royal Rota, it was game playing to them. They cared less of the damage done, the psychological harm done, the risk to life that increased to the Sussexes by the people out there that basically have lost their minds since 2016, knowing full well that Harry had said, take them. If you want them, take them. It doesn't make any difference, I am leaving. So I think we should bear that in mind when I'm going through old notes about both of the dukes, but also looking at some of the articles, and there are quite a few listed in the reference sources that have been written since then. And when you read them and know that all around that table at that Sandringham meeting knew about the letter, it was there, it was given in to the royal family, so everyone had full knowledge that this existed, but decided not to make that public, and instead have spent almost 6 years being punitive, vindictive, threatening, titles and all the rest of it, when in fact Harry told them from January 2020, take them if you want. Whatever words he used, but in the letter it said you can have them. And they've chosen not to. So if they do go down that route and all make a big song and dance about it, just be aware that offer was on the table in 2020. And if they do go ahead with it, as I said, there are implications for other members of the royal family. But knowing how things have certainly panned out in the last few months, I'm sure if they still wish to go down that route, that our current monarch will find some way to justify it, whatever floats his boat. Sussexes have moved on and they're doing very well. Let's carry on. The second creation of the Duke of Sussex's title, which takes its name from the county of Sussex in England, was announced on the 19th of May 2018 and made official by letters patent on the 16th of July 2018 to Prince Harry. The current heir apparent is Archie Mountbatten Windsor. Prince Harry holds subsidiary titles of the Earl of Dumbarton and the Baron of Kilkeel. Earl of Dumbarton is a title of Scottish nobility, referring to Dumbarton in the area of West Dumbartonshire in Scotland. The title has been created twice, once in 1675 in the Peerage of Scotland, and then a second time, but once in the Peerage of the UK in 2018. Royal Dukedoms in the UK. In British peerage, a Royal Duke is a member of the British royal family, entitled to the dignity of a prince and the style of His Royal Highness, who holds a dukedom. Dukedoms are the highest titles in the British roll of peerage, and the holders of these particular dukedoms are princes of the blood royal. The holders of the dukedoms are royal, not the titles themselves. They are titles created and bestowed on legitimate sons and male line grandsons of the British monarch, usually upon reaching their majority, which is coming of age, or upon marriage. There were a few dukedoms vacant for the Queen to choose from as the wedding approached. They were Clarence, Connaught, Kendal, Ross, Sussex and Windsor. There were also a number of unoccupied dukedoms, including Cumberland and Albany. Lucy Humes from Debrett's peerage was of the opinion that Prince Harry would only receive English and Scottish titles, whereas Prince William, being higher in the line of succession, would receive 3, which would include Ireland. Debrett anticipated that the Queen would choose from the vacant dukedoms, which she did in fact do. Lucy also stated that factors that might be taken into account include who held the title previously, and whether or not there were any negative connotations. Windsor had negative connotations, as it was the title Edward VIII after his abdication in 1936. Experts felt that Sussex was the favourite, with Clarence being the next most likely. The Duke of Sussex title became extinct around 200 years ago. The previous holder of the title didn't have any legitimate heirs, and there is no terrible or controversial history associated with this title. That's the official version, at least in books, history books that have been written since then. But let me state here that I wholeheartedly disagree with this last point regarding the choice of the Sussex dukedom not having any controversy attached to it. I will come on to those reasons later on in the podcast, as you will see. The titles can be inherited, but cease to be called royal once they pass beyond the grandsons of a monarch. As with any peerage, once the title becomes extinct, it may subsequently be recreated by the reigning monarch at any time. The first Duke of Sussex, Prince Augustus Frederick. Born on the 27th of January 1773 in Buckingham House, London, which later became Buckingham Palace when it was extended after extra renovation and new build work was carried out. Died on the 21st of April 1843, aged 70. Residence, Kensington Palace, London. The first Duke was buried on the 4th of May 1843. Worth stating here that Prince Augustus specifically requested not to be buried on any royal estates. Hence, he was buried in Kensal Green Cemetery, London, opposite his sister, Princess Sophia, another outsider, in some ways, as she was unmarried and had a child, and there were names of 2 possible men who could be the father, and neither any of the men or Sophia herself ever said who was the father of her child. In the article, there are lots of images and photographs. The photograph relates to the burial site of Prince Augustus, the first Duke of Sussex, and his sister, and there are paintings and images of Prince Augustus and both of his wives, because, as you will see, he was married twice. We'll go on further in the podcast to talk about both of the marriages and both of the wives, and there are, as I said, a number of images, paintings, drawings done of all the key people in this podcast. Both times that Augustus married, he married for love, but the monarch did not approve of either of the chosen spouses, and so did not approve of either of the marriages. And you will see the consequences of that in a few moments. The first Duke's early life. The parents of Prince Augustus was King George III and Queen Charlotte of Mecklenburg-Strelitz. As been mentioned, Queen Charlotte is listed by a few historians as being of mixed race. Most of the paintings of the Queen also confirm this point, but as per usual with such matters in those times, particularly in those times, history was not so much rewritten, but the ethnic origin was just not referred to in the majority of the official records. I make this point because of the political causes that became a focus for Prince Augustus and which were very unpopular with the British royal family at the time. One could argue, successfully in my opinion, that there seems a lot of denial about Queen Charlotte's ethnicity, but there are written pieces which state that Queen Charlotte came from a Portuguese family line, and she is indeed of mixed race. Prince Augustus took up causes that I suspect his mother would have been more than proud, just like our current Duke of Sussex. Causes such as agreement in and vocal about his views to abolish slavery, reformation of Parliament, Catholic emancipation, and the removal of existing civil restrictions on Jews and dissenters, which refer to Protestant Christians who separated from the Church of England in the 17th and 18th century. The first marriage. First spouse of Prince Augustus was Lady Augusta Murray. The marriage took place in 1793, against the wishes and without the approval of the monarch. The marriage was subsequently annulled in 1794, on the grounds that the prince did not seek approval from the monarch and got married anyway. The monarch never approved of the marriage, hence the reason it was annulled. Prince Augusta met his first wife in Italy, second daughter of the Earl of Dunmore. The couple secretly got married in Rome on the 4th of April 1793. The King's Minister of Hanover Affairs was sent to Italy to escort him back to London. The couple married again, without revealing their full identities, at St George's in Hanover Square, Westminster, on the 5th of December 1793. Both marriages took place without the consent or even the knowledge of his father. In August 1794, the prince's first marriage was annulled on the ground that it contravened the Royal Marriages Act 1772, as it was not approved by the king. The prince continued to live with Lady Augusta until 1801, when he received a parliamentary grant of £12,000, and the couple separated. Lady Augusta retained custody of their 2 children and received maintenance of £4,000 a year. In 1806, Lady Augusta was given royal licence to use the surname of d'Ameland instead of Murray. I have to say here, this was due to pressure, coercion, whatever you want to call it, from the royal family, that her name should be changed. So although it sounds as if, she just went along and thought, I'll change my name, it wasn't quite like that, as you will see from reference sources and any further reading that you do on the subject. The name was a distant name from Lady Augusta's mother's side of the family. We'll come back to that name change in the summary section in the podcast towards the end. The second marriage. A year after the death of his first wife, Augustus married a second time in May 1831, again in contravention of the Royal Marriages Act, to Lady Cecilia Letitia Bougin, the eldest daughter of Arthur Gore, 2nd Earl of Arran, and Elizabeth Underwood, a widow. On the same day, Lady Cecilia assumed the surname Underwood by royal licence. She was never titled or recognised as the Duchess of Sussex. However, she was created the Duchess of Inverness in her own right by Queen Victoria in 1840. As I said, there are images of both of these ladies in the article. Duke of Sussex title and involvement in patronage. Prince Augustus was made a Knight of the Garter in June 1786. In November 1801, the King created the Duke of Sussex, Earl of Inverness and Baron Arklow in the peerage for Augustus. Due to the fact that Augustus was still deemed to have no legitimate children to pass on the titles became extinct on his death in 1843. In 1815, the Duke became a patron of the Jews' Hospital and Orphan Asylum, later to become the charity known today as Norwood Royal Patronages, continued with Queen Elizabeth II, eventually becoming Norwood's patron. In 1838, Augustus made reference to meeting a scientist called John Herschel, and gave a speech where he spoke about the compatibility of science and religion. He tried to challenge the inequality and social injustices, which eventually his stance on such topics caused further division between the Duke and his family. The Duke and his father were very much estranged at this point. The current and former Duke of Sussex. They were and are considered somewhat rebellious. For example, they challenge age-old traditions and shatter royal stereotypes. Queen Victoria considered the first Duke of Sussex to be her favourite uncle, who did the honour of escorting her down the aisle when she married Prince Albert in 1840. an unspoken attitude to the existence of mixed race within royalty at that time, and I would say that not much has changed. Prince Harry had to officially request permission to marry Meghan. With the world looking, the Queen did not opt to refuse. Yet, as we all know now, and most people acknowledge, that this was not one rogue member of staff, but a concerted effort by the royal family to ensure that no wedding took place. I personally feel that even if the Queen had refused permission, Harry would have married Meghan anyway. In my mind, he is very similar to the first Duke of Sussex. History gives an insight on how the monarch has the power to erase hereditary entitlement or recognition if they so wish, under a variety of legislation and acts that only royals would ever have the need to use. The wording of the very acts themselves meant that no person outside of that structure could call upon it. No town names are changed, like the first Duke of Sussex's first wife, using a name from her side of the family, and was in effect given money and a different title to make it look better. But she and her children were still excluded, but sugar-coated by giving her a Scottish title and moving her to live at a distance. When Augustus died, it was deemed he had no legitimate children to pass on his Duke of Sussex title, even though they had been born within a legitimate marriage, but one that was not approved by the monarch. Meghan's removal, her name from Archie's birth certificate, but her title remaining, is significant, in my opinion. History will show the royalty element, but no mention of the person behind the title. Slavery mentality in full view. The audacity alongside naivety that the world and historians will not know or write about who the mother of Archie Mountbatten Windsor is. Someone who currently is written about every single day, more times than any member of the British royal family in any given year, is beyond foolhardy and more like wishful thinking of someone not in full control of their brain cells. Another element that needs to be included in the British royal family's comedy section of this podcast series, it's fast becoming worthy of a chapter of its own in the forthcoming book. If you know, you know. Without giving ideas to people, I can see a variety of ways the British royal family could have used aspects of royal law and procedures to other Meghan. If Harry had put the royal family first, which is what they expected, Harry leaving with Meghan scuppered much of that scope of choice, I am sure. I am so amused by that. I maintain the choice of the Sussex dukedom was not accidental, though I think the royal family had different ideas in terms of its relevance than a sane-thinking, non-misogynistic person could see. I am sure that there was a very high element of shade when the choice was made, and very little of it was seen in a positive light. But courtiers and media spun it like it was a fabulous wedding gift to the couple. The monarch's own behaviour, or silence on the behaviour towards Sussexes since 2016, make both monarchs complicit, and their intentions of the outcome of those actions have backfired spectacularly. The Sussexes have reached global iconic status, and nothing that the British royal family do from here on in will ever change that. Self-inflicted damage to the royal brand by its own people. The irony. I believe that the first Duke of Sussex would have liked Harry and Meghan. They stood their ground when all around them were shooting poison arrows. The first Duke married who he wanted, despite family opposition that he knew would follow. Both of his marriages were for love, and he did his best in the times that he lived in to secure payments for his first wife and children before they separated for good. The annulment made no difference to the emotions involved. Augustus was never considered at the level of other brothers in the family. He was seen as the weak one due to his asthma, and yet he was the one who quietly became very interested in the arts and music and politics, and very outspoken on slavery and race issues. He was very well read too. His living quarters were never as palatial as others in his family, but he travelled a lot and experienced more about life outside of royalty. Prince Harry had a tiny 2-bedroom cottage on Kensington Palace grounds. He was always treated like the second. When he asked for accommodation for him as a married man, he was allocated Frogmore Cottage, not a section of Frogmore House. Frogmore Cottage was former servants' quarters, and still the smallest accommodation by far compared to the rest of the wider family, even those who were not senior royals and did no work as such on behalf of the Queen. In the same grounds of Frogmore is another royal who was deemed to be a rebel, Edward, who gave up the throne to marry Wallis Simpson. Everything thrown Harry's way, on the face of things, looked easy to spin in the media, but when examined closely, it is all shade. Harry, paying for the fake renovation costs for a property that had designated funds in the sovereign grant in one go, scuppered the 12-year repayment deal that the royal family tried to sell to Harry. It is no coincidence that the Cambridge children would become adults in 10 to 12 years, respectively, in terms of George and Charlotte. Once again, trying to use him as the royal workhouse and whipping boy for distraction press coverage, but still prepared to cast him aside at the British royal family's convenience in 12 years' time, under the disguise of him paying back a fictitious debt. You can already see how the institution is trying, and what they're trying to do, to Harry and Meghan's children. What was done, in a similar fashion, to the first Duke of Sussex's 2 children, i.e. removed from the line of inheriting anything from their father upon his death. Packed off into the background, with his mother allocated a name, with the mother allocated a name from her mother's side of the family, and over time, meaning it would take an element of prior knowledge to find details of this lady and her 2 children. The actions and intent have backfired. When a couple have reached global iconic status, petty behaviour and actions by people who play dress-up and pretend to be diplomats, and who truly believe that they are placed in these positions by God, or a God of some kind, and that the people of the UK should revere them and bow down or curtsy in their presence. It's like a backstreet, jaded comedy performance. Outside of the UK, very few people care about such things, and certainly do not in any way revere the family. The belief system and rules and structure built around this fantasy is not revered outside the bubble in the UK, and definitely not in the world audience. Most of the global population do not buy into hereditary power, and as a construct it will be extinct sooner than all the few remaining families recognise. Every shady act done by the British royal family and the media to stop the wedding taking place failed. The fact that the British royal family acted quickly to remove footage from an Australian news interview with a certain person who admitted this plot existed, and people were paid to stop the wedding. All footage in the main high-profile countries, as well as footage on the internet, was removed within hours. If this was not true, the British royal family would have been silent, like they do on so many things. The official reason for its removal was that 2 former gossip publication personnel were named as being involved, and that they threatened to sue if it was not removed. The Sussexes are free and are not dependent on the British royal family for their existence. The Sussexes are involved in impactful work globally and are very high profile. They have options. Augustus stipulated that when he died, he did not want to be buried on royal grounds. I am glad that Harry and Meghan made their own arrangements regarding Lilibet's christening. After that was something else that the royal family and its propaganda team in the Royal Rota were holding out, threatening, taking it back, refusing, all of that nonsense that went on just to sell their rags. And all along, Harry and Meghan just got on with their life, got on with the ceremony elsewhere, in a different country. I respect them for that, and I respect them in their choices all round. Because this pick and mix approach that the British royal family keep on pushing in order to deflect or to make the firm feel relevant and important on key dates is becoming tiresome now. Leave them to their games. They are in the dust clouds of Sussexes now anyway, and they are less than dust clouds to Sussex supporters. Another fact, when we're looking at dates and history behind various dates, Anne Boleyn was beheaded on the 19th of May, 1536. Meghan and Harry's wedding day was on the 19th of May, as you know, in 2018. Trying to link it to a negative event, but the Sussexes have surpassed all levels of such pettiness. The couple know their value. Henry VIII's second wife was found guilty of high treason by a jury of her peers in the King's Hall at the Tower on the 15th of May, 1536. She was executed by decapitation on the 19th of May, as we've said, and is thought to have been around 35 years of age at the time. I could say more around that date and the the various scenarios of what people could have thoughts about. I leave you to come to your own thoughts about that. Doesn't matter whether it's true or otherwise, it's just the thoughts that come into your mind about that date, about the person, what happened to her, about the age, and also think of the age of Meghan as well at that time. Things that were also similar between the Dukes of Sussex and the Duke of Windsor, but there were many serious activities and interests of the Duke of Windsor which were ignored. I wonder why. Let me say, from the onset in this small section of the podcast, far more detail and reference sources that pertain just to the Duke of Windsor and Wallis were serious enough or unsavoury enough, dependent upon one's point of view of such matters, that would have implicated many members of the wider royal family. For example, the links with Hitler, both in terms of admiration and actual face-to-face meetings. I'll give more details shortly, but make no mistake, the Duke of Windsor was not alone in this area of activity. Just because a family changed from their German name to Mountbatten Windsor does not mean anything other than a change of name. Views and interests remained, but were hidden behind contrived English accents. A few photos are around, but you will see more depicting the Windsors and far less of Queen Elizabeth at the time. Royal reporters diminished such photos of Queen Elizabeth II as if they were not accurate views, because she was just a child, and copying her parents. Photo depicting that salute appears in more than one of the reference sources listed at the end of the article. Not having to comply with the Equality Act in her reign would suggest that views were very much in evidence. There are many areas of evidence that make it crystal clear about the current royal family views on race, including footage and views on people of colour generally. It is also crystal clear of the white supremacy base that follows them, and is likely employed by them in all palaces. The Duchess of Sussex's treatment since 2016 is rubber stamping the evidence file. The family and its mouthpieces can say all they want. They can gaslight all they want. The rest of the world know what they saw and continue to see and hear coming out of the UK government and its royal family. Here is a short extract from an article in The Independent dated 23rd of April 2021, and obviously it is listed in the reference sources. Edward succeeded George V on January 1936. The government and Crown rejected his proposal to Wallis as the Church of England, of which the monarch was head at the time, did not allow divorced people to remarry in church. King Edward ruled the British Empire for 324 days and gave up the throne in December 1936 to be with Wallis. But what did the couple do next? Unlike Meghan and Harry, Edward and Wallis decided not to move to Wallis's native America, but instead set up home in France. In 1937, the pair made a controversial visit to Germany, where they met with Hitler, who was rebuilding his army at the time. And there are photographs in the newspaper articles and also in the article for this podcast, which will be up as usual on Monday. Yet, it is the two Dukes of Sussex who had independent thought, travelled and held wider views on topics that UK royalty throughout centuries refused to acknowledge. It is both dukes that history has maligned, and others who have committed far worse would be considered criminal outside of the royal protective bubble. But they are written about in glowing terms. Times have changed, and there will be many books written about Harry and Meghan's experiences and their philanthropic endeavours, and key books written by Harry and Meghan themselves. There is no book out there that will be any more factual than what they produce in the future, compared to the Royal Rota bots masquerading as journalists and writers, producing propaganda and pretending it's independently researched work. My takeaway from looking into the life of the first Duke of Sussex is that Prince Harry has more in common with the first Duke on the things that royalty want to pretend does not exist, or did not happen in that way. The royal family were trying to appear generous and celebrating the marriage, when in fact every so-called gift was a rotten apple. And much like their day-to-day life, it was all performative and nothing of real substance. I will think of both Dukes of Sussex as kindred spirits, who married who they loved, and did not follow royal tradition and protocol just because it was there. They both were and are independent thinkers who are involved in wider initiatives outside of the traditional royal family performative tasks. I think that the Dukes would have liked each other, and the mixed race element in the family line, despite what the majority of records show, is an added joy. The Sussexes were making history with a range of innovative projects which are benefiting a wide scope of people. Meghan is the first Duchess of Sussex, not least because the Queen could not be seen to refuse the marriage. So despite trying other activities to destroy this union, the fact remains that history will show Meghan's name and title, just like the American birth certificate for Archie. So the one amended in the UK is the only document that is different compared to all the others in history books of the future as to the reasons behind the amendment. Yes, I think the two Dukes of Sussex would have got along just fine. And to bring this podcast to an end, as it is almost an hour, so much of what I was going to put in this section is now in the article, but this is a summary. And this is about the similarities in the punitive actions and descriptions used by both kings against their Duke of Sussex sons and wives. As I said, this is a summary, far more in the article. Both wives were painted in the media as being the one in the marriage that was in control. The wives were depicted as strong, leading and controlling their weak husbands. Meghan's name removed from Archie's birth certificate, just the title of Duchess of Sussex remains. The first wife of Augustus had her name changed by the monarch using royal license. The name was a distant name from within the maternal side of the family, a way of othering her from the links of her and the children to British royalty. Lady Augusta Murray was moved to a small town in Scotland with the view that she would disappear from royal society and use her new name. Augustus married again after the death of his first wife, and he married Lady Cecilia. Once again, the king did not approve of the marriage, and Lady Cecilia's name was also changed by royal licence to Underwood, another attempt to deny her linkage to royalty. Lady Cecilia was never recognised as the Duchess of Sussex. However, she was created the Duchess of Inverness in her own right by Queen Victoria in 1840. Queen Victoria's favourite uncle was Augustus, and who she subsequently asked to walk her down the aisle on her wedding day. The right wing have an issue with people of colour, but no problem with white German people changing their name, but still supporting Hitler and Nazis. That was deemed, and still is, perfectly acceptable. The Queen making a Nazi salute was not done out of ignorance. It was done with full knowledge, as you will see in the reference sources following this podcast and article. And there were many members of the German side of the family who were openly Nazis, even though one member of the German family took in a family of Jews and offered them protection. But their 3 daughters of that same German family married Nazis. You will see in the reference sources articles and photographs of various people within the royal family's heritage living in Germany and openly supporting Nazis and all that goes with that. I didn't put that in this, as I said, it's already long, but there are some really good articles giving further references if you want to look further, but there's quite a bit of information there as it stands now. As you will see, there's something like a page and a half of just links to various articles and research papers. When Edward left the shores of the UK, he was not just thrown to the mercies of potential kidnappers. He had security, not least because the royals were concerned about an attempt to kidnap him and to use him to barter with the UK. Edward went on to move to a Commonwealth country with his wife and was given a diplomatic role. Harry was forced out without security, without funding, and his locations given away twice. No concern about kidnap or assassination for him and his wife and children. Complete opposite for the couple who openly fraternised with an enemy movement and who caused a constitutional crisis in the monarchy. Prince Harry was never going to be king. He posed no danger to that position, but he was treated like a traitor. We all know why the Sussexes were treated differently, but the royal family and advisers underestimated the Sussexes big time. Time and time again, the point is proven that this royal family cannot read a room and is the reason for their almost daily failures and embarrassments. There are many more examples of the dual standards in treatment to both Dukes of Sussex and their wives and children, and the king who had to abdicate, but who was looked after and protected and given different duties. Probably going to be recorded as one of the biggest mistakes, if not the biggest mistake, in UK royal history, and the level and type of abuse encouraged to do life-threatening things against this family, and do so without the blink of an eye. Such cruelty and vindictiveness done for personal gain of the remnants of the British royal family is a noose around their necks, and they all in turn will come to rue the day that they ever embarked on this hunter and prey activity against one of their own and his family, and considered that it would be acceptable, as others had been removed from life over those 1,000 plus years without a moment of reflection or regret. The stakes are very different now, and I firmly believe that this self-indulgent activity, which benefits anyone but the people of the UK, will come back to haunt the firm on a global scale. The rabbit are no longer hiding and are standing tall in the spotlight, holding every weapon of truth to disarm this pattern of behaviour, which will be forced to cease. The prey is prepared for the hunters on commission, and the world is watching too. That's it for another week. As I said, the article is quite detailed, and there are quite a few reference sources for you to look at if you so wish, now or in the future. Hope you found this interesting. Again, this could have been a series of podcasts, but I've kept it to one episode. So, for this week, it's goodbye from me. Goodbye from Ivy. Bye.